Good evening, everyone. Can I just double check we're live streaming? Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Executive of the 11th of June 2024. My name is Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of the Council and Chair of the Executive. This meeting is being held in the Council Chamber at the Berries in Godalming and is being webcast live. The agenda was published on the 3rd and the supplement was published last Thursday to issue a replacement report and appendices for item 9 on the agenda. And please be advised, everyone, and I imagine this is probably more to me as it is anybody else, that this meeting is taking place during the pre-election period. And please be mindful of the pre-election period policy as set out in the Constitution. Item 1, apologies, Ben.
Thank you. Have apologies for absence from Councillor Keele this evening.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the meeting of the 7th of May 2024 published on the website. Can I have all those in favour of signing the minutes? Thank you very much, everyone. Declarations, anybody? No. Item 4, questions from members of the public. Seeing none. Questions from members. Again, seeing none, in which case I'll move on to leader and portfolio holders updates. I have a few updates to give of my own and a few on behalf of Victoria. My first is to say thank you to the electoral services team who have moved squarely from the setting up and deployment and execution of the Police and Crime Commissioner elections and Whitley and Milford by-election straight into having to set up the entire thing again, having stood it all down again for an election on July the 4th, which means they've effectively been working at the high end of their pace for the last few months. A few other updates. The Structure and Legal Democratic Services. Council approved some growth posts to legal services in December 2023. Recruitment is ongoing and we have secured some resource for permanent post, but we still haven't fully resourced that department and it does still continue to have an impact on capacity. Monitoring officers due to update members on the annual whistleblowing register and annual code of conduct complaints within the next month. Whistleblowing will come to audit and risk on the 17th of June and code of conduct will come to standards and general purposes on the 1st of July. We will be holding the council's first simultaneous meeting of 2 committees at both Guildford and Waverley. So that's the Standards Committee of Guildford Borough Council, the Standards and General Purposes Committee of Waverley Borough Council and the Corporate Governance and Standards Committee of Guildford Borough Council so that they can look at the Constitution. And finally, to note that the executive on the 2nd of July has been arranged for the 9th to the 9th of July due to the pre-election period. Other than that, there's no further updates from me, and I'll hand over to anybody else for any of their updates. Bear with me, starting with Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Paul. Just like to say that the much vaunted car park strategy task force met last week. A very good meeting. I know that Councillor Gale, who's here with us tonight, attended it. A lot of very interesting things came out of that and will be taken forward and hopefully implemented by the end of the year as part of the overall sustainable transport policy as well. So that was a very good meeting indeed. And I'd also like to, as I always try and do meetings such as this, pay tribute to the work of our enforcement team who are going, as they always do, above and beyond dealing with issues across the breadth of the borough. In particular, the one in Bramley. So my thanks to them as always.
Thank you, Tony. Kika, any updates from you?
Yes, I do actually. Quite a bit, I'm afraid to say. Okay. Community support. We've been allocated £132,290 through the Household Support Fund, which the Department for Work and Pensions has allocated to councils in England to help with essential household bills and items. This is Scheme 5 of the fund that runs up until the 30th of September or until all our funds are spent. We're working with 7 identified organisations, allocating £47,925 to them in total. This is provided through vouchers, grants, buying goods, paying bills, and direct financial support to households. The recipients are Hazelway Cupboard, Hale Community Cupboard, Godalming and Villages Community Store, 3 Counties Money Advice Home Start in Waverley, South West Surrey Domestic Abuse, and Brambleton Fridge. We have ring-fenced £69,490 for Waverley households to apply for a grant from the council for 550 max. We had to close the scheme temporarily after 2.5 weeks due to such high demand, so we could process the volume of applicants, but it will be reopened tomorrow afternoon. The Scheme 4 of the fund that operated from April the 1st, 2023 to March 2024, the communities team allocated £213,137 to 356 households that applied. We also funded the same 7 voluntary organisations mentioned before, with grants totalling 98,000. Regarding the Thriving Communities Commission Fund, officers are currently carrying out the annual review. With this, we'll be able to look at the monitoring data and information and also allow the organisations to show their case, their good work. Obviously, it allows us to challenge and ask questions as well. But it is apparent that the voluntary sector is having to provide the same support with less and is finding it increasingly difficult. Finding resources which may also include building maintenance and trying to get new volunteers are becoming very problematic. Just quickly about the Museum of Farnham, the tenders have come in and we've had strong interest in the work for the overall contractor, so we'll be speaking shortly to a point. With the leisure centres, usage is increasing month on month, and the investment by everyone active in new gym equipment is paying dividends. Over the next few months, the new Active Communities Coordinator will launch the new outreach programme. Details will follow soon, and I know that we're very keen on that outreach programme. And finally, the EDGE. Surrey County Council and Waverley Borough Council officers with local stakeholders continue to work on the future operation for the centre and will be brought forward outlining current performances which will enable us to recognise next steps needed to ensure the centre remains open for community use. Thanks.
And I will just say thank you to Councillor John Robini as well for trying to bridge some of the gaps between Surrey and Waverley officers, as he does hold roles at both. Councillor Williams.
As it's the pre-election period, I'll keep my counsel and nothing to report.
This week, very wise, I think, for both of us. Councillor Paul Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Nothing to report.
Councillor Townsend.
Just very briefly, Leader, just to again thank the electoral team as well because they're also running the neighbourhood plans for Cranley and Elsted, which is on Thursday, the 20th of June. So they are extremely busy at this moment in time, and I'd like to wholeheartedly thank them for all the work they've been doing. And also to thank everybody that came to the business question time that we held, which was really successful. We had some great keynote speech by Vicky Price, and you know, I think it was really well attended, and I think everybody that attended it got something really good out of it. So that was a great event, and something obviously we hope to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Nothing from me this evening.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I just want to report that the renovations at the Riverside Court in Farnham are now complete and indeed occupied by residents via the borough's council letting system, which is called Waverley Home Choice. So just wanted to say well done to the team.
Thank you. And Councillor Murray.
Nothing to report, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Moving then on to item 7, recommendations from overview and scrutiny committees. There have been no meetings of the ONS committees, and so there are therefore no recommendations to review. Item 8, the community asset transfer policy, which I'm very happy is finally on the agenda after a number of back and forths. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader, and I can share that delight. There's probably plenty of delight to go around, and I'll also be very brief because I think this is a very good thing and should not be controversial in any way. There is clearly demand from our towns, our parishes, and from other voluntary and community organisations to take responsibility for some of the community assets that we have in our stewardship. And it is our policy, it's our priority to enable that where we can. There's an Appendix 3 which already lists the assets that we've managed to transfer, but it's only right and proper that we have a framework for doing this, and that's precisely what this agenda item, this report proposes. It describes assets that are suitable for this kind of a policy, and it describes the organisations which are suitable for consideration, and it prescribes the criteria, the framework, the procedures, and the other steps that we will take in a formal and structured way to take applications through to completion. On behalf of the officers, well, I'd like to thank the officers for producing this, but on their behalf, I'd also like to stress, obviously, that we'd rather not have a wave of speculative applications. Our resources are limited, particularly in the estates and the green spaces team. But with that one provision, I thoroughly and wholeheartedly recommend the report to the executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I pass on my thanks to officers who've helped draft this as well. And this new version makes it very clear that those assets must stay in community use. They can't be developed for something else, fundamentally altered. And this draft also expands the initial version of this that was looking predominantly at town and parish councils to also include community interest companies, charities, and other community bodies that may have similar or comparable objectives to town and parishes. So I think this is an excellent upgrade to what we had been talking about over the last few months. Any other speakers? Councillor Williams.
It's really just to say that I think there is an appetite out there amongst a lot of our towns and parishes for certain of those community assets, and we'll welcome this news.
And I think, and I will say this to the Towns and Parish Clerks group, I'm expecting there to be an early run on certain land that they've been after for some time, and they'll have to be a little bit patient while we process through those requests. Obviously, over time, this will become an ad hoc thing that is done when requests come in. But I can imagine there's going to be an early rush on some of those items. So I would just ask any towns and parish clerks that if they are watching this to be a little bit patient with us in the first instance when we process the initial batches. Any further speakers? Tony.
Thank you, Leader. This is an exciting initiative and one I wholeheartedly support. And what I particularly like about it is the fact that it gives the community groups an opportunity to not only support their local councils by providing logistic and or commercial information, expertise, but also act in their own right within their own communities. And also the fact of course that the assets themselves are protected, their status being protected in perpetuity. So it is an excellent initiative and one that really should, as Marcus said, it should proceed without any controversy at all. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a town or parish might want to take on their local park and they might be the best person to do that, best entity to do that, but running a football pitch, it might be the local football team. And this allows that to consider those types of entities and not just
they work together.
Or they work together in partnership, exactly. George.
Thank you. I, like Tony, fully support this. Certainly as a Farnham Town Councillor, it's something we discussed quite in detail and starting to look at the fields which are in Waverley's, which could be transferred over. Maybe it might be wise, as Paul mentioned, that you might get a big rush, is that the parish and councils have a window and you make it quarterly and say, right, you can apply in April, July or something like that. So it's paced out. So this is the window when you can apply, and then the next window you can apply, similar to, I don't know, maybe it's like SIL, I think, yeah? So that might be something you might consider.
I believe we've put in such a window and it's structured a couple of times a year or something like that at the moment. Mark, you might know off the top of your head.
Well, Leader, actually there is also a sort of a self-evident mechanism because it's not something where you just where someone writes us an email and says, "Oh, I'd really like this, please. Can you give it a think?" You know, there is a proper process. A business plan has to be put together. We've built into our framework checks and balances mechanisms to protect us, to protect our council taxpayers. So, you know, anybody who does not have a self-contained business plan that addresses everything that we require in this document, which is a bit like SIL, it has all sorts of things that we would expect to see in an application. will not get past first base, just like a SIL application. If we don't get a fully functioning business plan that's convincing, it's unlikely that we'll invest a great deal of time considering it. We'll send it back for another go so that the people who have gone to a trouble of putting together an application that meets all of the questions that we are inevitably going to ask, we can give priority to them.
And actually, I think the analogy comparing it to SIL is pretty appropriate because they're like SIL, there is obviously a process you go through. There is then an approval cycle, and the ones that are within executive limits can be approved by the executive, and any that aren't will go to council. The same thing exactly will operate in this regard. And I suspect that the bigger town and parish councils will be, there's clearly a bit of demand for some of the areas that they have in mind, and I imagine we'll see a few of those come in first. And if we need to refine the process after that, we can do that working with them. Any further comments? No, in which case, let me just bring us to the recommendation singular. The recommendation is that the executive approves the proposed community asset transfer policy, Appendix 1, and notes the equality impact assessment, Appendix 2. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Moving then on to item 9, scheme of officer delegations. Can I thank all the officers who've been working on this, as well as the various groups of members at Guildford and Waverley who've been looking at this incredibly detailed set of changes. The sections that you have in front of you now are specifically the scheme of delegations that are around executive powers as opposed to council or other powers. This has been through the Joint Constitutions Review Group. The wider body of it will go through the Standards Committee and some of it to council as well. It's had a lot of oversight, and I would commend it all to you. And if there are any questions, please do shout. What I would suggest is that for the body of this that will go to council eventually as part of changes to the Constitution, if there are members with concerns who haven't sat on those groups, I would ask them to flag up their queries in advance so that we can look at amendments or revisions at council if need be. Are there any questions on this item? No, seeing none, let me just move to the recommendations. The two recommendations are: 1, that the delegation of executive functions set out in the revised joint officer scheme of delegation and proper officer scheme, appendices 1 and 3, be approved. And 2.2, that the monitoring officer, in consultation with the leader, deputy leader and portfolio holder, be authorised to include any changes to the scheme of delegation in respect of the executive functions recommended by the Standards and General Purposes Committee. And all those in favour of those two recommendations, please show. Thank you, everyone. That is agreed unanimously. Item 10, supplementary estimate for democratic services. You'll see before you on item 10 a supplementary estimate for democratic services. This is effectively a limited restructuring. We're at the position where, in the fullness of time, democratic services and legal are an area that is, I think, crying out for a joint service, because it obviously does the same thing at both councils and can be done efficiently at that level. We aren't quite at that position yet. And option 3, as it's articulated here, is designed to get us at Waverley to the point that we're able to move to a joint service in the fullness of time. There are some changes that we need to make internally here before we get to that point, and this option brings us to that. Are there any questions? Nope, seeing none. Can I have all those in favour of the recommendation, a supplementary estimate of £55,187,000 2024-25 to restructure the democratic services team as per option 3, and the executive notes that a parallel strand of work to restructure the management team of the joint strategic director of legal and democratic services is underway, as reported to the executive on the 7th of May. That report proposes a joint assistant director of democracy and governance and a joint head of governance role. This will address the risk in the short term, cognizant of a longer term desire to deliver a shared service approach to both services. An evidence-based decision was made to focus on ensuring that provision of the services within each council is based on solid foundations. These efforts will support the delivery of excellent and resilient services for now, but they will also provide a pathway to future sustainable shared services. So I can have all those in favour of recommendation 2.1 and to note 2.2. Thank you very much, everybody. Apologies. Mark?
Sorry, Leader, I'm not sure if you were supposed to read out 2.4.
And it should be 2.3.
Well, what should be?
Yes, what should be
2.3.
2.3 and is in the papers as 2.4, that this broader work has been taken into account in the restructure of the Democratic Services team. Can I also just see, and that is noted as well? Doesn't need a vote, it's just noted, but thank you. And thank you, Mark. Item 11, I believe it's probably necessary for us to take this into exempt because we need to have some discussion about it in more detail. So that pursuant to Procedural Rule 20, in accordance with Section 100A, Paragraph 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the Executive agrees that the public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following matter on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during the item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by Section 100I of the Act and a description specified in paragraphs 2 and 3 of the revised Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and that 2, that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing this information. Can I have all those in favour of moving to exempt session? Thank you all. We'll now